Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I am Ronald Kato. This week, Africa enters the space race as countries scramble to address their scientific, climate and communication needs. With a spaceport planned in Djibouti, the African space industry is projected to top $22 billion in 2026. We assess the economics pushing African countries to look skyward. Plus, Senegal looks to break its dependence on foreign grain. Researchers are testing the suitability of 4 wheat varieties adapted to the country's climate. They say the results are promising. Also, Congo breaks ground for a new gas plant estimated to cost $5 billion. The facility by Italian oil major Eni will increase gas production and exports from Congo by more than 4.5 billion cubic meters a year. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. Long considered a latecomer, Africa is launching itself into space with ambition and drive. With enormous gaps in communication, education and science, the demand for satellite capacity in Africa is growing fast. Working with established countries, 22 African nations maintain active space programs, with dozens of African satellites already orbiting the Earth.
For long, African satellites have had to lift off from launch pads in Kazakhstan, China, or the United States. But with a spaceport planned in Djibouti, that's about to change. Despite starting small, Africa's space ambitions have grown in recent years. As satellites get smaller and cheaper, an increasing number of African nations are accelerating their space programs to serve their own scientific, communication, climate, and military goals. The African space economy is expected to top $22 billion by 2026. In 2022, countries allocated a total of $539 million to their respective space programs. 272 companies are currently carrying out space-related work. South Africa and Egypt have the continent's most vibrant space programs. In a sign that the continent deems space as a strategic industry, the African Union in January inaugurated the African Space Agency based in Cairo. Experts say the demand for satellite capacity will double before 2025, but caution against less private sector investment and interest.
Rorisang Moyo is a space industry analyst with Space in Africa. Thank you very much, madam, for your time. Lots of people are bullish about Africa's space industry. But what are the countries to watch?
I would say South Africa, starting with South Africa. And the reason why South Africa is so powerful is because most of their satellites are actually locally made, which is very important in making the industry, their industry self-sufficient. And then afterwards, we go to Egypt, which has some of their satellites, which are about 3 that are locally made, where they're taking charge of the value chain, having their own engineers, creating the components. Then after that, I'll then say, we have to watch out for Algeria and Nigeria as well.
Rorisang, Africa has huge gaps in science, in communication, in health, and is looking to space to solve some of these challenges. But where should the investment go?
Investment should be directed firstly towards human capacity building, because in as much as we can talk about identifying the problem that we need to manage our land, our disasters, our water, we need to make sure that we have a homegrown industry of people who are able to do that, because the problem that we have is that when we collaborate with stronger spacefaring nations, the gap is normally filled by their skilled personnel and not our skilled personnel.
Rorisang, Africa is coming late to the space party, but what are its unique advantages or strengths? Are there any?
Our unique advantages come specifically from our young population. We have a very large workforce that could contribute to that, and that is something that is also recognized by the African Union in their space policy strategy document. Compared to other nations that have older populations or aging populations, we have a young population that could contribute to many parts of the sector in terms of research, the engineers, and other things like business development. So a young population is very good because we have a lot to bring in terms of intergenerational dialogues, in terms of creative thinking and coming up with solutions. Above that, we have vast amounts of land that have to be used. We have our seaports. So even before we look at new projects like the building of the new spaceport in Djibouti, we could be looking at launching from our very own seaports, which would actually be cheaper, where we can engage private entities.
Speaking of the spaceport in Djibouti, how much of a game changer will it be?
It would be a very positive change in terms of the fact that most of the times we've had to rely on countries like France to launch our satellites for us. The gap that we have, as I mentioned before, the brain drain, where we can have somebody being trained here, but then only being able to practice what they want to do somewhere else. So we'll be in charge of the launching and the manufacturing because it's a $1 billion project.
Africa has been working with leading countries such as Russia, the US, and China on its space programs, but we're now living in a geopolitically charged global environment. How can countries navigate the geopolitics of the world without hurting their space interests?
African countries should navigate the geopolitics of space by being in an alliance with the country that serves them the most. They shouldn't be involved in other external problems that are brought by these space powers, because these space powers have had these problems since pre-60s, where it started with Russia and America. And then in the 60s, we then had countries like China and Japan and India coming in. So it's something that where we cannot really escape our involvement in it due to the fact that we have a lot of financial and resource constraints. But we have to be very strategic. We need to make sure that we have sufficient collaborations so that we are also powerful actors, because we do know that we're at the end of the space race, but we're trying to advance.
Rorisang Moyo, nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Supply chain problems, rising grain prices, and inflation caused by the conflict in Ukraine have had Senegal rethinking dependence on foreign wheat. The country imports 800,000 tons of the grain per year. An ambitious effort is now underway to replace imports with homegrown wheat.
Senegalese researchers have begun harvesting experimental homegrown wheat, the latest step in a years-long effort to reduce reliance on import. The second most consumed cereal after rice, wheat is an important staple in the West African nation. However, Senegal, like many of its neighbors, depend entirely on foreign supplies.
The project was to develop crops of wheat varieties adopted to Senegal. You know, Senegal is a wheat importing country, so it is a country that depends entirely on imports to meet its demand for wheat consumption. And the two countries, the two main suppliers of Senegal, are Russia and Ukraine. So you see the problem.
Senegal's tropical climate is not naturally suited to wheat, but domestic trials have been underway for years. Supply chain problems, rising grain prices and inflation caused by the war in Ukraine have added urgency to the country's effort to achieve self-sufficiency.
The objective of these trial plots is to prepare the farmers to train them to be able to sow at least 1,000 hectares by next November, inshallah, 1,000 hectares of wheat.
The institute is trailing 4 wheat varieties, 3 from Egypt and 1 bred locally.
Now, as Europe cuts its reliance on Russian energy, Congo is coming to the rescue. The country has broken ground for a gas plant by Italian oil major Eni. Situated on Congo's Atlantic coast, the plant will pump more than 4.5 billion cubic meters a year for domestic and export markets.
Point Noir, Congo. The natural gas liquefaction center is to be built near this oil-producing city and will be used for households, local industries, and above all for exports. The project is financed to a tune of $5 billion by the Italian oil group Eni. The site chosen for the center is located near Congo Power Plant, which supplies 70% of the country's electricity. This is a new sector, a new challenge, and above all an element of growth and economic development. I hope that it will translate into prosperity for the people. According to the authorities, this project will be carried out in 2 phases. Production is due to start in the last quarter of 2023, and from 2025, Congo will produce 3 million tons of liquefied natural gas per year, according to the ENI Group. The main objective of this project is to develop the reserves of the Marine 7 license in order to continue to meet Congo's domestic energy needs, and at the same time to seize the opportunity to exploit gas surplus through the production of LNG. According to hydrocarbon experts, the country has reserves of 100 billion cubic meters of natural gas.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa. With me, Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.